Today is a very special High Wire because I know we've got some new viewers that are watching. I'm not just talking about your average people that heard about the High Wire. Right now, at this moment, as you're watching this screen, so are reporters from CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR. They're all watching right now. Well, at least let me say their production assistants or their associate producers are, because I doubt any of the people up there actually do their own research. But what are they researching today? They're researching the High Wire. Why? Because of this headline from the New York Times on Friday. Kennedy's lawyer has asked the FDA to revoke approval of the polio vaccine. Now, of course, this is an article about a petition that we at the Informed Consent Action Network submitted through our lawyer, Aaron Siri. In the quote, they mention us briefly. In the article, I love Aaron Siri, Mr. Kennedy said in a clip played on a recent episode of a podcast hosted by Del Beatry, who is Mr. Kennedy's former campaign communications director and the founder of the Informed Consent Action Network. I want to talk about that name just for a second. Our name that we started with back in the very beginning, actually the very end of 2016, I started a nonprofit called the Informed Consent Action Network. I want you to look at that for a second. We didn't name ourselves Down with the Vaccine Program, the Let's Eradicate Vaccines from the Planet Corporation, nothing of the sort. Yet every time you read about us, that's what they try to tell you. But what is very clear is right in the heart of our name. What we are here for is to uphold the entire concept of informed consent. Where does that come from? Informed consent comes from the Nuremberg trials, after Nazi doctors were tried and proven to be guilty of testing on innocent people and testing vaccines and drugs and surgeries. They had no consent. They were just submitted to it. And after that trial, they ended up saying and making a statement that every democratic nation in the world signed the very first rule of the Nuremberg Code: the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. It doesn't say on some things. There are some things that are exempt that you can just do to people in a hospital that they have no choice over. It doesn't say, well, if it's vaccines, the government then does get to inject you without any decision whatsoever. That is not what the Nuremberg Code says. It says the voluntary consent. And it goes on to say that any use of coercion or force should be considered illegal. What is coercion? Well, is it mean when you're actually told you're not allowed to go to work if you don't vaccinate? You're not allowed to have the public education that your taxes pay for if you don't take the vaccine? No. Informed consent is supposed to be complete and true for every free citizen in this world, and that's what we stand up for at the Informed Consent Action. What does the action mean? It means when we see that laws are being broken, or that consent is not being granted, or perhaps that the product itself and its dangers are not being pointed out to the public but hidden from the public, the exact opposite of informed consent, then we go into action. What is that action? Well, we're America's public health watchdog. We then go to our lawyer, Aaron Siri, and his team of lawyers, and we do things like file Freedom of Information Act requests, demanding transparency on certain subjects from our government when we think they're hiding something from us. And then sometimes they hand that information over, but sometimes they break the law. Remember, the government works for us. We are the citizens' watchdog. That government works for us. And so when we ask for their emails or ask to see what evidence do you have about the safety of that vaccine, they have to hand it to us. And when they don't, when they break the law, we bring a lawsuit against the government of the United States. We've won lawsuits against virtually every health agency: FDA, CDC, Health and Human Services, the National Institutes of Health. I've read so many times about the misinformation that Del Beatry spreads or ICANN spreads. I always say the same thing. Really? You ought to try winning lawsuits against the government of the United States using misinformation. That's right. It's impossible. But today we're going to get into the details. We're going to get into the details of the polio vaccine. I am going to talk to Aaron Siri in a little while. He's coming up just around the corner. But before we do, I want to talk about why I'm here. Of course, I made a documentary called Vaxxed that at the center of it was a whistleblower inside the CDC, Dr. William Thompson, who came forward and said they had committed scientific fraud on the most important vaccine autism study, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccination study and autism. They cooked the books, if you will. They kicked kids off the study after they were already in the middle of it because it wasn't giving them the results that they had hoped for. You can watch Vax, which is on our website for free anytime that you want. But while I was touring the country with Vax, we started doing interviews of people with vaccine-injured children and sometimes the children themselves. And very specific to this conversation today, which every single headline, if you're watching your news, the panic is over polio. The politics of polio is afoot. And we always hear about, well, you know, Del Bigtree and Robert Kennedy Jr. or Aaron Searier want to go back to the iron lung. They want to put you back in an iron lung. I want you to hold on to that thought and ask yourself in this next interview that happened on the Vax tour, did we get rid of the iron lung? Or did we just improve it and shrink it down, hang it around your neck, and poke a hole into your throat? Yes, that is what the iron lung looks like now. And you know who's wearing it? Oftentimes, vaccine-injured children and people. This is a video of Colton. Take a look at this.
Colton was a 13-year-old healthy, strong boy. He loved anything that has to do with an adrenaline rush. Motocross was his passion. We went to the doctor's office and the doctor says, hey, he's the age that you should get the HPV vaccine. I said, okay. So he was administered the vaccine, and on the third round, 2 weeks after, he started having a really bad neck ache. And then this is the last day he got to ride that big boy bike. And that day he came home, he was pale, starting to feel nauseous, really sore neck. He didn't feel good. He went to bed, and the next day I checked on him. He still didn't want to get out of bed. I just thought, man, you're just really weak and exhausted. And that evening, when he sat up to take a drink of water, he said, Mom, can you give that to me in my left hand? I can't use my right arm very good. It's weak. And he tried to lift up, and all of a sudden he just flopped back, and his head just hit the pillow, and I went, Colton, are you going paralyzed? They immediately took him down to Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake. When the doctor came out and asked me questions, they said, well, has he been sick? Has he had any changes or anything? I said, no, he hasn't been sick. He had the HPV vaccine on February 1st, and they went, oh, well, we'll be reporting that to VARS, and they did.
I did do a lot of sports, and it was my favorite. But now I have to sit on the sideline, just watch everybody. I'm angry that they're still giving out the vaccine. They don't care that people are getting hurt. It's a joke. You gotta do your research. Like, you can't just trust a doctor anymore.
Fortunately, we lost Colton in 2018 when he took his own life. I think he felt like he was a burden on his family. It was unfortunate. But his story has forever stayed on my heart. And I know this is difficult, especially for all of you reporters right now. I know what's going on inside of you. I worked at CBS, I get it. You're saying to yourself, well, I mean, it's rare. It's rare when that happens. I mean, okay, I suppose that does happen. I mean, his own doctors wrote it down. They knew it was the HPV vaccine. But you see, I toured the country and did thousands of interviews like that. Thousands. I drove around in a bus with a team of people that said Vax on the side of it, and thousands signed their names of injury, autistic children, you name it. Sure, you can sit here, and I know you're trying to say to yourself, but I've been told the vaccines don't do that, that injuries are really rare. Well, I just want to ask you really quickly, just because it's rare, does that mean they deserve it? I mean, do we not study rare cancers in children? Do we not study rare diseases all around the world? Well, only a few kids are suffering from it, so just let them die. And then think about this. This isn't a disease. These are perfectly healthy children that were forced to take a product in order to go to school, and somehow you're making it okay that on a rare occasion they are paralyzed or they are killed or they have a brain swelling incident. But let me make this clear about Colton, because this was the shocking moment. It really was. I was standing there. My partner, Polly Tommy, was doing the interview. And as I heard the machine going, fill his lungs so that he could talk, say a few words again, I realized, oh my God, we didn't get rid of the iron lung. It is hung around this kid's neck in a little backpack that's keeping him alive. And when we say, oh, we got rid of paralysis and polio, did we? Did we really? Did you know that right after the polio vaccine was introduced, at that moment, everything that had been categorized in one giant group as polio, many different causes of paralysis, they were all called polio before the vaccine. Right after it, they broke it up and they only went with poliomyelitis. Here's the other ones: acute flaccid paralysis, Bell's palsy, transverse myelitis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, intraviral encephalitis, traumatic neuritis, acute disseminated encephalomyelitis. Look at that for a second. Every one of those paralytic conditions are written as side effects of the vaccines we are giving our children. And if this happens to you and you end up being paralyzed, you get a walkable iron lung. So don't tell me that, oh, Del Bigtree is going to bring back the iron lung. No, the vaccines do a plenty good job doing that themselves. In his case, it was Gardasil, the human papilloma vaccine. And in it, where does it list? One of the side effects, nervous disorders, acute disseminated. Look at this. This is in the marketing information. This is why the doctor said, oh my God, we know why he's paralyzed. Acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, dizziness, potentially Guillain-Barré syndrome, paralysis, and in his case, transverse myelitis. If that's the first time you're seeing that, then you know why the Informed Consent Action Network exists. It shouldn't be. It should be showed to you before you get involved with this product. You have the right to know that there is a potential to have this side effect. How rare is it? Is it rare enough? Is it zero? It's definitely not zero. In fact, take every one of those side effects, and each one of them's rare, and there's like 20 of them on every single vaccine. Are they still rare when you put them all together? Well, the CDC once asked Harvard Medical School to look into how rare are the injuries happening from vaccines. In fact, when we look at VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, which is what the mother of Colton said, the doctors reported it to VAERS, this is what that page looks like. All right? Now, when Harvard Medical School was paid $1 million to look at this, they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to look into our own Harvard Pilgrim Health System, our HMO. We're going to do a study on it and see and track doctors and see how many of the injuries they're actually going out of the way, very complicated system, in a very busy day, how many of them are reporting the actual injuries that you just read there. What percentage do you think that is? Do you think it's, now they'll say, well, I mean, look, not every one of those cases is proven. That's true. I will concede that. But here is what Harvard Medical School found when they looked into it. Likewise, fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are even reported. That's a mic drop moment. Wait a minute, what? Fewer than 1% when they did that study, I believe it was back in 2014. Now, maybe it's more now, maybe we're more aware, but every doctor I meet keeps telling me vaccine injury doesn't exist. Every reporter that's watching right now has made a habit of saying to the public, vaccine injury is 1 in a million. Really, 1 in a million? How do you know that? From the 1% of total reporting that we now know is going on based on Harvard Medical School? And what happened when Harvard Medical School, after being paid $1 million, said, here's what we found, CDC? And guess what? You know what they said? We found a way to automate the VAERS system so that we get rid of this error, so that the injuries or potential injuries automatically go into the system. What do you think, CDC? You know what the CDC thought? This is what they wrote in the end of this study. Unfortunately, there was never an opportunity to perform system performance assessments because the necessary CDC contacts were no longer available. And the CDC consultants responsible for receiving data were no longer responsive to our multiple requests to proceed with testing and evaluation. They gave us $1 million, but when we told them the truth, they never picked up their phones again. And so now mainstream media will tell you vaccines have been tested extensively, says it even in the New York Times article. So tested, one of the most tested products we have on the market. They are so safe, we know it, mountains of evidence, which if you've been watching the high wire since the beginning of 2017, you know is total baloney. That's what all of our FOIA requests and all of our lawsuits have proved. They don't have barely any evidence at all. But don't just take my word for it. Take Bernadine Healy's word for it. Former head of the NIH, the most important and best funded research science facility in the world, making Bernadine Healy during her tenure one of the greatest scientists the world knew. When she was interviewed by CBS, what did she say about the mountains of evidence showing how rare vaccine injury is?
This is the time when we do have the opportunity to understand whether or not there are susceptible children, perhaps genetically, perhaps they have a metabolic issue, mitochondrial disorder, immunological issue, that makes them more susceptible to vaccines, plural, or to one particular vaccine, or to a component of vaccine, like mercury. The fact that there is concern that you don't want to know that susceptible group is a real disappointment to me. If you know that susceptible group, you can save those children. The reason why they didn't want to look for those susceptibility groups was because they're afraid that if they found them, however big or small they were, that would scare the public away.
In every single crime, you need a motive. You need a motive that makes sense. Why would they do it? Why would the scientists, the CDC and the FDA and the NIH not do proper studies, Del? Why would they tell us there's mountains of studies if they're not there? She just said it. Because they're so concerned if they even did a study of those that had been injured like Colton. Like, let's track Colton and everyone like him that's walking around in a walking iron lung right now. Why don't we study them? What did they eat that day? What was there? Is there any genetic something going on? Is there a study we could do? Maybe we could find, if we did a blood test, we could find out, wait, they have a susceptibility, and maybe this vaccine is a better form of it than this one. Or maybe this child should have them spread apart. All things that would be totally sensible in a modern world that have never happened in the United States of America. Why? Because as Bernadine Healy said, they're so terrified that even looking into it, some of you would start to wake up and say, wait, what? You mean vaccines aren't perfectly safe? They're not as safe as water that I drink? So then everyone in media has been lying to me? You see, media thinks you're too stupid to know. Doesn't matter that you still will see all of those side effects on every drug that you take. For some reason, we can't do that with vaccines. And so let me be perfectly clear about this New York Times article before I bring Aaron on here in just a few minutes. Their headline is not actually what our petition was about. Our petition was about the fact that this particular polio vaccine, just one of many, several, was only tested for 3 days. A 3-day safety test. That's all it got. That, obviously, New York Times thinks that is perfectly acceptable. Why would we do that with everything? This cancer drug had a 3-day safety test. This lupus drug, 3-day safety test, go out and get it back. The government's going to mandate on you, and New York Times is behind that 100%. Let's be honest. For every reporter watching right now, if you've never reported on a Colton or told a story about the vaccine injuries that are listed right on the insert I just showed you, then what you're actually saying is you don't care about all kids. That it's okay to kill some innocent children in the United States of America every year. It's okay to injure some innocent children every year. See, that's what makes us different. That's what makes Robert Kennedy Jr. different than all of you. Because what he's done is spent his entire career as an environmental attorney fighting for the little man. Those rare instances where your career is being hurt by an industry. One of those few people that actually try to make a living off of catching fish, but the mercury in the fish and it's killing the Hudson River doesn't affect all of us. The rest of us are just fine. So what's Bobby Kennedy's problem? Why has he got to deal with the fishermen and all their little problems? Why does he care about some Indian tribe that's getting their forests knocked down and killed? What difference does it make to me? Well, it doesn't, does it? Because you're a reporter. And for most of us, that river doesn't affect us, and that forest doesn't affect us, and that toxic waste spill in the middle of an African-American community doesn't really affect us, so why report on it? But Robert Kennedy Jr. is not wired that way, and neither am I. Ever since my days at CBS on the doctors, it was important to me to tell everybody's story. I don't believe it's okay to destroy some children's lives so that others can be made whole. I think that's murder. I think that's abuse. And I think we're capable, with the technologies we have today, with AI, home of Apple, home of IBM and PCs and computers and computer learning, we could actually get to the bottom of this. We could actually study these children for the first time ever and find out why is it happening to them. And let's bring up that VAERS report. If you want to keep saying it's rare, is this 1%? Are we going to add 2 zeros onto the 38,000 and say that there's potentially 3 million deaths? By the way, I just want to double check. I'm not sure this is 1 year of reporting. Those numbers seem high. I don't want to get called out on this. I feel like this is a couple of years with COVID included, but you get the point. But the 219,000 hospitalizations, are we going to add 2 zeros onto that because it's only 1%? What if it's 10% and it's just 2 million? Is that okay? I mean, here's the point. No one in our regulatory agency cares. They're not studying what percent this is. Yet they'll tell you 1 child dying from COVID, 1 child dying from measles is too many. Boy, we're a long ways past having that issue with the vaccine program. It's thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands. And if you include the world, millions. And we keep giving more and more and more and more vaccines. And the New York Times keeps telling us 3-day safety trial is all that is necessary. I've got Aaron Siri coming up in a little bit to talk about this issue. But from now on, if you're a reporter and you want to say that Del Bigtree is spreading misinformation, we're going to go ahead and prove you wrong today. And I'd really like you to report, and why don't you just put the headline, New York Times doesn't care about rare instances of child death. New York Times doesn't care about all children. Washington Post doesn't care about all children. CNN does not care about all children, just some children, the ones that took the vaccine. Or as Jimmy Kimmel put it, screw you, Wheezy. You don't get to go into the hospital here because you didn't put yourself at risk, at rare risk, to save my child. Is that the world we live in? It's not the world that ICANN is fighting for.